Why did Tigger always smell so bad? Because he was always playing with poo. Let's crack on. Okay guys, I'm really excited to do this video, and I'm also very brassed up as well because I actually recorded this video, 2.5 days ago, and then I've had a total unmitigated disaster with ScreenFlow, and oh god, I just couldn't get it. I was 7 hours trying to get this video exported yesterday, and I just couldn't get it to export, so we just had to trash everything and start again. So there you go, and apologies for the video being a little bit late, but I am really excited to tell you about yet another new feature that's going to be coming in Therapee 5.9 and is currently available in the dev build for all those of you who are adventurous enough to go and download it. Do not ask me how to download and install it because I am technically inept. It took my friend Zabia nearly 2 days to get me into a position where I downloaded and installed it, and but if you go up over onto the Raw Therapy forum over at pixels.us, there's lots and lots of nice people over there who will bend over backwards to help you. So just go over to the forum, it's free to join, and you can get yourself sorted with the dev build. But anyway, I'm digressing. As I said, for the third time, I'm really excited to tell you about scopes. We've actually now got scopes in Raw Therapy. What the hell's a scope, Andy? Well, yeah, this is a scope. It's a Vectorscope. And yeah, very useful thing it is too for things like skin tone. Yes. And the other thing we've got is this, a waveform, ooh, which we can either have in full RGB colour, or if I turn the colours off, we can just have it in a more conventional luminosity form. And so I'll just leave that like that just for a moment and try and discuss or try and describe to you why using a waveform or a vectorscope, well, we'll get to vectorscopes in a minute, but why this waveform is so much more useful to you than a histogram. That's one form of histogram which you're used to seeing, and of course if we turn that off and turn the individual colours back on, okay, there we go. And so we're very used to working with histograms, and we all know where everything goes. Our highlights go over here, and our shadows and darkest tones go over there, and then somewhere milling around in the middle is our midtones. But, you know, I mean, this is a typical example in this picture. The darkest tones are all over here on the right, but they are recorded over here on the left, or displayed over there on the left in the histogram. Now then, that's all well and good, but it has no sort of relationship, visual relationship, or with the image, or very little. Now then, if I come over to a vector, or, well, a waveform, wow, right, so what on earth is going on here? Well, the simplest thing for me to, simplest way for me to illustrate what's going on, if I go to local adjustments and I just go and add a simple spot, and I go to colour and light, and let's turn the lightness up. Let's be crazy. Let's turn it all the way up. Now, you can see what I've done there, but you can also see in the waveform, if I turn that spot off or disable it temporarily, that's the spot turned off, that's the spot turned on. And the thing about it is, if I move this spot to the right, and then I turn it off and I turn it on, you can see what's happening. The change is on the right hand side of the waveform. And similarly, if we come over here and yeah, see? How cool's that? So if I go and turn this spot off, because I don't really want that on there, as you can see, the waveform relates directly to the image because it reads your image from left to right. Reading the image from left to right, why does this this brighter region of this waveform terminate there? Really simple, because the sky terminates there and it doesn't run all the way to the right hand edge of the image. So that's why we've got this big gap here. So now you can work out that these tones down here are your darker tones running from the left hand side of the image to the right hand side of the image, and these brighter tones up here are your lighter tones running from the left side of the image to the right side of the image, or as far as they go over to the right side of the image. So fundamentally, this waveform is more visually correlated to your image and is therefore somewhat more intuitive for you to use, and you can recognize areas in your image from looking at the waveform. Alrighty, now what I'm going to do is just briefly turn off the colors so you can see what's going on with these lines. Now these lines are marked out in stops, and this line up here, you can think of that as 255 RGB. So if any signal goes beyond this line, it will be clipped. If any signal sits on that line, it will be clipped. So that's 255. This is 127, 128. This is 64. This one here is 32. This one here is 16. This one down here is 8. And the next one down, in other words, the third one from the bottom, is 4 RGB. 4 RGB is a key one. You might get away with dark tones sitting on that 4 RGB line, but on a print, you've got no chance. So you can always take a look at the waveform and you'll instantly know whether you need to lift your blacks up. Alrighty. And you'll also see if you need to bring your highlights down or employ a bit of highlight recovery. So let us now turn those colours back on, and we can use this for white balancing the image, and we can also use it for adjusting shadows and highlights and exposure in general, and we'll come to that in a minute. But first of all, I want to go over to this image. Nice guy, can't remember his name. It's an old picture, but a really nice chap. He's a geologist, yes. Anyway, what I'm going to do is just reset this image. Okay, so that's it out of camera. And let's just flip over to the waveform so we can just sort of get an idea of what's going on. Now, you can see that we've got sort of a mottledy grey background, which has got a lot of creases in it and was a bit too close, but well, there you go. You can fix that in Photoshop. But, oh dear. The lighting, this is in a totally enclosed room with no ambient light, and the lighting is just from a couple of flashes with softboxes on. So, accurate flash, accurate white balance. The image isn't too far away from correct white balance, and the skin tones aren't all that far away from being good. And we know we're relatively neutral because we know it's a grey-ish background, and you can see the background here. It's all relatively dark, So the tones are running along here from left to right, and that is the background. And this coloured sort of fuzzy whooshy bit is our geologist friend. Yes, it is. Now, what most people would do if they'd shot a portrait is this. They'd go and get a white balance tool, and they'd think, Christ, I need to get the skin tones right. Oh, lordy, lordy, lordy. Let's go and get a 32 by 32 colour picker, and we know that this background is grey, don't we? And let's click on it and white balance the image, and there we go. So if I now go and switch out to a lockable colour picker, and I come in here, and you can see that the temperature of that grey is 13, 13, 13, or 13.3%, 13.3%, 13.3% RGB. That's because we've just set that as our white balance point. Yeah, not a good idea, because we don't actually know that that was grey. This is why people always use a colour checker and get the subject to hold a colour checker. But, you know, I mean, it is what it is. You've got to be very, very careful, because if you click on the wrong grey, in other words, a grey that isn't middle grey, if it's too dark, it has a tendency to make your image go a little bit cool. If it's too light, it can have a tendency to make your image go a little bit reddish, brownish. And similarly, what happens if the grey isn't absolutely grey? In other words, it's not absolutely neutral. So this sort of usual thing that people do to try and ascertain a white balance for skin tones in a portrait shot, it's not always the best idea. And if I just reset that image again, now I did say that the white balance was pretty accurate because of the way the image was shot. And you can actually see that that grey is a little bit more red than it is green, and considerably less blue. It's a warmish grey. It's actually a grey blanket. Yeah, it's not a neutral grey photographic background. So you've just got to be careful when you do a grey balance for trying to achieve accurate colour. It's a bit of a case of caveat emptor, buyer beware, because grey is not always grey. Things are not always what they seem. So I'm just going to get rid of this colour picker here just by double clicking with the right mouse button. And before I go and white balance this image, or correct the skin tones, the first thing I'm going to do, I'll just do a cheap nasty job on it. I'll just lift up the exposure a little bit, and I'll just lift up the shadows a little bit, I think. It'd help if it turned shadows and highlights on, wouldn't it? And we'll just lift the shadows up to there. And yeah, doesn't look too bad, does it? Now, what I want to do is go and get a lockable colour picker again. And I'm just going to bang it just there. And then hold the control key down and right click with my mouse to make it quite large. And you can see that the ratio there for that skin on his forehead is 49, 40, 33. Now, that implies that the red is higher than the green, which is higher than the blue. That is the correct order for a skin tone. And usually, you can get yourself in the ballpark with a skin tone if you have a percentage ratio of 80, 70, 60 with red, green and blue. So, you know, the red is higher than the green and the green is higher than the blue. And on a percentage ratio, something like 80, 70, 60 will put you very much in the ballpark. So, just to prove the point, let's turn this exposure up until that red there hits 80. There we go, 79.6. So this is sort of 80, 60, 50. Think of it in that respect. So it needs a little bit of tweaking. So how can we best tweak this colour? Well, I'm going to dump this colour picker because all it does is get in the way. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get my crop tool. And you've seen me do this before on other images. And I'm just going to unlock the ratio. And I'm just going to have a look at the skin tones on his forehead. Okay. Now, this is a RGB waveform of that area of that crop. Now, there is another variant of the standard waveform, which is this, which is the RGB Parade. And that is really useful for you to see the stepped relationship in skin between red, green and blue. And this fundamentally goes for human skin, irrespective of ethnicity. You know, I mean, it's quite interesting. But what we are going to do is just come over to the Vectorscope. And if you look at this Vectorscope, we've got red, we've got green, and we've got blue, we've got yellow, we've got magenta, and we've got cyan. And we've got this strange dotted line here. And that strange dotted line is, believe it or believe it not, called the skin tone line. Yes! And as long as your skin tones are sitting roughly along this line, guess what? You're on the dance floor. Yes! So, let's now come out of that crop because it'll drive you potty. So, you can see now that that vector is taking on board all the colours in the image as opposed to just the colours and tones in the guy's forehead. So what I'm going to do is just, you see we've got a brightness control here, so we can pick out what we can see within the Vectorscope and sort of dial in on the tones and the brightness levels that we're looking for. And we've also got this little coloured button up here on the right. Now, if that button is very small, what we can do is click it and it becomes big. And then you can see this cross with this dot on it in the middle. As I hover over the skin, you can see that wherever I go, it sort of follows that diagonal line. Virtually every point on his face is around that diagonal line. So can we sort of dial in a little bit more? Yes, of course we can. I'm not really going to bother so much with that ratio. I'm going to do it using the skin tone line. So all I'm going to do is to come into the colour tab and I'm going to come to the RGB Curves. And as you can see, we've got RGB Curves. I'm just going to put them in standard. So let me just sort of let you see what effect subtle movements on these three curves can have on these particular colours here, because these are the ones we're watching in this tight white cluster here. All right. So if I grab the highlight end of the red RGB curve, if I move it left, you can see I'm bringing that cluster of colours a little bit closer to that line. And of course, we're making things go red. Alrighty. So we'll just put that back. If we come to the bottom of the curve and we directly lift up, you can see we shift the colours in a particular direction. If we take it back to where it was and then move them to the right, you can see we go in a different direction again. So all you're trying to do is trying to align that little group there on that skin tone line. And so messing around with the red isn't really going to do anything, because red's pretty much where it needs to be. If we come to the green channel, and let's move that to the left, and then bring it back, and let's move it down a little bit. Now then, that looks quite interesting, because that's centered that little cluster of colours just that little bit better on that skin tone line. Let's go and have a look at the look. It's only a very, 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 very tiny adjustment. And let's go and have a look at the blue channel, and let's come to the highlights end again. And you can see if we push and steepen the gradient of the blue channel, we can wang those colours right the way across the other side of the Vectorscope. But if we just drag down a little bit, you'll see we're starting to shift that group of colours more towards that yellow line, which means we're making them go warm. So we take them back to their default position, and what we need to do is just leave those there just a moment. And when you use these RGB curves for colour balancing, in this respect, make sure luminosity mode is unchecked. If we just come back to the exposure tab, and I just dial down that exposure a little bit. Okay, and maybe add a little tiny bit of contrast, just like that. And I think that's looking pretty much a-okay. And if we just move our cursor around, you can see that we are pretty much constantly centered on that skin tone line. Okay, so there you go. That's how to use that Vectorscope for getting your skin tones right. How cool is that? And you know, you couldn't work that stuff out with a histogram. So if you use the RGB curves in RAW Therapee 5.8, the only way you can sort of get a handle on the colours is by looking at the image. And looking at the image is never a good idea, because your eyes just get overworked. And when you see colours, if you stare at them for too long, they go all funny and your eyes don't recognise them properly, because your eyes do nothing but tell lies. This Vectorscope takes all that away, because it's pretty much like painting by numbers. And you know, you just can't go wrong for simple things like colour balancing and getting skin tones right, and doing it quickly and super efficiently. You just can't go wrong with a Vectorscope. You just can't go wrong. Right, I'm going to come to this other image over here. Hello, darling, how are you? Yes. And what we'll do is, this is the finished image. I'm forgetting the skin tones correct. And this is where we start out. So what we'll do is we'll start again. And this is a little bit different, because this is shot with ambient light. I'm coming through a north-facing window with a net curtain. Net curtains are the bane of the portrait photographer's life if he's doing portraits in the client's home. Very, very, very awkward things, net curtains, because of the materials they're made from, and because net curtains are usually white, but the treatments on that material can cause all sorts of strange colour casts to come off that net curtain when the subject is in very close proximity to it. And so, I mean, the net curtain on this big window here is probably, God, what? No more than about 2.5 or 3 feet from Joe here. And yeah, it can be a bit of a pain in the backside. And it's sort of greenish yellow if we switch back to the finished image. And the main thing is that, yes, this might look quite cold and sterile, but getting the colour into a neutral state then gives you, or puts you in a good position to be able to make creative changes, let's put it like that. But, you know, if you're photographing, I mean, Joe's not got much makeup on here, but when you're photographing people with a lot of makeup on, how do you white balance? How do you know what the skin is supposed to look like? Because the makeup will just change the colour of the skin completely with regard to colour balance. So I'm quite lucky here because I can see quite a lot of unmade up skin on Joe here, and so it gives us a target to shoot for. And so what we'll do is we'll come back to neutral and we'll start again. And I'm just going to go over to the vector again, and we'll just, there we go, and just pull it down a little bit, and then we'll just edge the brightness down on the Vectorscope just a little bit, and then I'm going to get my crop tool, and I'm just going to make sure I've got lock ratio unchecked. I'm just going to come and select some of this skin here. Okay, so now I can see I've got this little cluster, and you can see how close it is to that line. Let's just go and have a look at the RGB Parade. Yeah, it's not looking too bad at all, but I actually want to put a little bit of exposure on Joe first, and I should have done that before I came into the crop, so I'll turn the crop off and I'll come back to the exposure tab, and I'm just going to just lift the brightness just a little bit. Don't forget these lines on the waveform, 100, not 100, 255, 128, 64, 32, 16, 8, 4. And you can just see I've got one or two, especially in the green and the blue, I've got one or two darks that are falling onto that 4 line, or maybe just a little bit lower. So I'm going to lift up the blacks just a little tiny bit. And this is a strange thing, because when you lift up the blacks in Lightroom, you move them to the right. You actually move them to the left in raw therapy. So there you go. And I think I'm just going to leave that like that, because now I've got all my tones, all my darkish tones, quite high up, and I think I'll just go and increase a bit of shadow compression, and that might just lift them up a little bit more. Yeah, I'm liking that. We might just go and add another little bit of exposure, take it up to 0.35. I'm not particularly worried about these clip marks here, because that's these sequins here, so I'm not particularly worried about those. So yeah, as you can see, the white balance isn't too far off, but if I now actually go and do that crop, let's just come in and grab that area again. Now you can see they're not quite as stepped between each other, but you've still got that slope with red higher than green and green higher than blue. And that's what you're shooting for all the time. And so all I'm going to do is come into the color tab, and before I do that, I'm going to just bring in a color picker, and we'll control right click to lift its size up to maximize it. And you can see we are 73, 54, 41. Okay, yeah. Using that same 80, 70, 60 rule, let's go and try and get greens to around about 60 and blues to around about 50. Okay, so let's now come into the RGB curves, and you watch, they'll have settings stuck on them again. Let's go to standard. There you go, told you. And we'll reset all of these. which is a pain in the backside, but there you go. And did we have any changes to the red in the previous image? Yes, we did. Okay. So we're at 72.9 on red. I'm sort of going to leave red where it is, I think, and we'll try and bring the greens into line. Now, if the reds are sort of 72.9, we want to be looking at sort of 62.9 for the greens. So what we can do is we can just make a little adjustment by dragging that top green just a little bit. And you can see as I drag the green, the red is actually coming down. So now we're sort of at red 70, green 60. Let's come over to the blue. And let's now get the blue over to the left. And just try and get that up to around about 50. There we go, we're nearly there. There we go. And now let's just go back to that red. And let's just take the red up just a little bit. Rather like that. And now you can see we've got a different spacing between the red, green and blue channels. And so if I now go and get rid of the crop, and there we go, super duper neutral. Now then, if we want to come into the exposure tab and maybe just drop the exposure compensation that we put in before, rather like that. And I don't think that's looking too bad at all. And don't forget, if we neutralize it, that's what it looked like before. So from an exposure point of view, you might want to bring it down a little bit more and maybe take it back to 0 and just trying to keep everything on the down low. And yeah, there you go. But you got to admit, there's a heck of a tight difference, heck of a big difference, I should say, between the starting image, which is the raw file as it comes off the camera, and where we've ended up, just using the RGB curves and this RGB Parade, which is a split channel derivative of the RGB waveform. And let's now just come over to this image here. Oh, completely different, a landscape. Now, the thing is, in the previous two images, we're working with skin tones. And so skin tones, as we know, have got this ratio that we can work with. And also, if we use the Vectorscope there, the hue saturation Vectorscope, I think it's the hue saturation Vectorscope because they give us two. Yeah, hue saturation Vectorscope. They also give us this hue chroma Vectorscope as well. And yeah, I'm still not quite sure how that works, though. No doubt somebody will enlighten me in the next week or two. Then once I'm enlightened, I can come and enlighten you guys. Yes, I can. But if we come back to the waveform, because we've got no known quantity for colour or tone in this landscape, which we haven't, and we've got no skin tones, so we can't use the Vectorscope's skin tone line. We've got to use something cross between common sense and a little bit of creative decision making. All we want to do is white balance this image, but before we do that, this is shot with a Zeiss 21mm, and like all wide angle lenses, the Zeiss 21mm not only does it vignette across its field of view, vignette luminosity, in other words, gets darker towards the corners, it also vignettes colour, and it has a colour shift from its centre axis out to its edges, and you can compensate for colour shifts in axial colour shifts in lenses with one of these. Now, this rather dirty and dusty piece of white acrylic, cost a couple of quid off eBay, or you could go and buy a commercially available LCP, lens calibration panel, for a rather extortionate amount of money, and all it is one of them cut into about 6. Yes, and you get one bit. So, yeah, but all you do is take your exposure and then you clap this over the front of the lens and take the exposure again. When you get in a situation like this, it's beneficial to sort of point your camera up at the sky and take the photograph at pretty much the same settings. Well, just what you're trying to do is just produce what you call a lens calibration frame or a flat field frame. Just the same as we produce flat field frames when we do astrophotography, Milky Way, wide field astrophotography. Properly, you only do it properly if you produce dark frames and flat field frames. And yeah, but flat field frames are flat field frames. And you can't apply a flat field frame in Lightroom. Well, you can, but you need a flat field plugin, and then it goes and converts everything to bloody DNG. But of course, in raw therapy, before we do anything else, we can come over to the raw tab, and I can go to flat field, and I can go and select a flat field frame. And the one I want is, which one? Let's go for that one. 8197. And wait for it. Ta-da! Yep. Did you see the image change? And you saw the waveform spread out. Now, what do we want to do? We want to, obviously, get a good white balance on this image. Something to put us in the ballpark. Get us on the dance floor. You can tell Strictly Come Dancing started, can't you? Yeah. No, stop it. And yeah, so the simplest way to approach this will be to align blue, green, and red. Alrighty, so blue is high, green is next highest, red is low. What I'm going to do is not use the RGB curves. There's no need. We can come into our colour tab, come to white balance, and if we want to lift red up, this is the way I look at it. I would try and align red and blue with green. After all, we've got twice as many green photosites and therefore twice as much green channel information within our images. We've got either red or blue, so chances are green's pretty much on the money. So it's a simple way of looking at it, but it works. Now we can lift red and decrease blue by simply using the blue-red equalizer. And so if I start to move this blue-red equalizer to the right towards red, you can see blue and red are coming down towards green. And what I want to do is to try and get green to overlap with, or red overlap with green. And so because this is an additive color image, the same as your raw file, when you add red and green, you get yellow. So there we go. So now where it was green, it's now yellow. And then what we want to do is to try and bring down the blue to match the green. And to bring down the blue further, we can use the temperature slider, and we can just move the temperature slider over towards yellow, over towards the right, and let's just use the plus minus buttons. And come on, there we go. And then we've just got a little bit of magenta showing, and I might just come and tap the plus button on the green magenta tint slider to try and remove most of that magenta. And there you go. So where we had a big split between red, green and blue, we've now got them all together, and where they overlap perfectly, we've got white. And white on a RGB waveform means neutral. And there you go, look at that. Big difference, big change. And what else can we do? Let's just come over to the exposure tab, and let's go and activate the shadows and highlights. And if I attempt to bring the highlights down, okay, get some detail back in that sky, and then bring the shadows up, rather like that, you can see we're really addressing the dynamic range in that image and really sort of bringing things together. However, because we've had the shadow highlight tool in RGB mode, we have generated a bit of a colour shift. It's not too bad. It's more of a saturation shift than a colour shift, because we haven't really generated much of a change in the waveform. But just to be on the safe side, we'll put it in lab, so that all those changes are taking place on the L channel. And you did just see a little bit of movement in the waveform there, and everything sort of come back to relatively neutral. And I think we'll just go into that at 100%, and we'll come over to the raw tab. And first of all, let's go and look at that little trick I showed you on this very same image not more than a few days ago, maybe 2 weeks, when I did this and showed you this neat little trick in chromatic aberration correction, where we've got this colour shift between the sky through the tree branches and the sky outside of the tree branches. Just uncheck avoid colour shift, and there you go, Bob's your uncle. Everything in the garden's rosy. And so in this raw tab, we've got a flat field frame applied, and we've corrected the strangeness in the sky by unchecking avoid colour shift. And I think all we'll do now is go and throw a bit of capture sharpening on that. And there we go. Contrast threshold 6, and contrast threshold on the dual demosaic at 6 as well. And I think that looks handy dandy. And just as a quickie, you'll notice this is RCD plus bilinear. And you remember in my raw Therapee 5.8 videos, my favourite dual demosaic algorithm is RCD plus BNG4. Well, bilinear is just like BNG4, pretty much so, except it's faster. Yes, it's faster because BNG4 can be a little bit on the slow side. So yes, bilinear is faster, and we all like a bit of speed, don't we? I shouldn't really have said that, should I? I'm just talking about vroom vroom psh, gone speed, not the other sort of speed. Oh, shut up, Andrew. Right. Okay, so there we go, folks. That's just a quick introduction to... God, I'm trying to shift that out of the way. And that's just a quick introduction to our new scopes inside of raw Therapee, inside of the dev build, and what's going to be coming out in the next public release. So yeah, hope you enjoyed that, guys and gals. Hope you got something useful out of it. And if you did enjoy it, don't forget, give it a thumbs up, give it a like, leave a nice comment below if that's what floats your boat. And if you're not already subscribed, click the subscribe button, the little ringety-tingety bell, and there you go. So stay safe, stay well, and keep taking the pictures. And until the next time, I'll see you. Tooroo.